Hi friends! Today I wanted to share with you my souvenir collection from around the world. After traveling to 30 countries, I have gathered quite a bit of souvenirs. Some you may recognize from recent trips, some you may not. Of course, it would take forever if I discussed every souvenir, however, I do plan to share with you some of my favorites. Starting with the souvenirs I happen to be wearing, first of all is my headband. You may recognize this from Sapa. I got it in Sapa, Vietnam after my trek. So I got a headband. It is handmade by one of the ladies who lives in one of the villages there. It's one of my favorite purchases. I just love headbands and that was such an incredible experience for me. Second is my amber necklace, which is from Gdańsk, Poland, which was a stop on our Baltic Sea cruise. It was the first time Jen and I had traveled out of the country. It was my first and only cruise I've ever been on, actually. We loved all of those stops so much, and I love Gdańsk so much, and all around the Baltic Sea you saw so much amber everywhere, but especially in Gdańsk. They had this amber street, which is where I got this necklace from. I just remember that street so vividly and all the beautiful amber. It's not something I see very often, and I just loved seeing all the amber there. So behind me on this shelf, this is actually my travel shelf, and it's where I keep the majority of my travel souvenirs. I would like to show you these two. This is from the first trip I ever took. These aren't souvenirs I would normally buy now, but when I was 16, I thought these were the kind of souvenirs that you're supposed to buy. I have this little bear and this snow globe, and I've just kept them out all this time because they're really special to me, even though they're kind of basic souvenirs, but I just really like them because they remind me of that first trip I ever took. I had the privilege of going on a trip when I was in high school with my high school. The teacher who had taken us on the trip, he had told us that every year a lot of students get to go for free or for highly reduced cost because of all the fundraising that he does along with the students participating. I convinced my mom and she actually allowed me to go, and the trip was completely free. So my first trip and what got me hooked on travel. Now next is my Russian stacking doll. I think this is one of the coolest souvenirs that I own. This doll came from the same trip as the necklace. We got to visit Russia on a cruise. We got to spend 2 days in St. Petersburg. This just reminds me of all the adventures we had, because even those 2 days we still got to do a lot. We saw the palaces. I remember the Amber Room. And there's just so much with that trip. Next, I have just a jar of some pebbles. My sister and I went on a road trip to see our friend in Monterey Bay where she was going to school. We stopped by this beach. It was called Moonstone Beach, and we have this thing for moonstones. This was our first time seeing a pebble beach, which might not be super exciting to you, but we're from San Diego and we've never even seen beaches with pebbles. We just have the sand. So we thought it was so cool, and we had such a great time going through the moonstones, and it was so unexpected. We were actually really upset because we were trying to pass through Big Sur, but that road was closed that day, so we had to turn around, which made us sad. So we were super excited to find this really cool beach. My next souvenir is from Hawaii. Jen and I went on a trip to Hawaii. I hadn't done a lot of traveling at that point in time, and that was my first time to a tropical location. I remember on this day when I got this, we went to Manoa Falls, I think they were called. We got to see the jungle. It was my first time seeing the jungle. It was my first time swimming in a waterfall. It was also my first time getting a drink out of a pineapple. And that might sound kind of cliche, but to me it was so like picture perfect. That night at dinner, we sat in this tiki bar with live music and like the fairy lights and a drink out of a pineapple. It was at that time the best day of my life, and to this day I remember it as one of the best days of my life every single time I see this. So after dinner I actually decided to get this tiki to remember one of my favorite days. And the last thing I have to show you on this shelf are my souvenir coin jars. I think money is one of the best souvenirs because you could always collect the money as a souvenir. On my most recent trip, I only had a backpack. I wasn't picking up a lot of souvenirs, and definitely not big souvenirs. However, money I like to keep from every single country. I have bills as well, but they're not kept up here on this shelf. Next, we are moving over slightly for this decoration right here. This is a traditional Bulgarian wall decoration. It originated with like a cowbell. It's a cowbell and it became a decoration. I had met a local and she was actually telling me all about them. So I really appreciated the story she was telling me, and she told me that her grandparents actually do still have one hanging in her house. And my very last souvenir from over here is this ring. I had got this ring in Laos, also on this recent trip. It just really spoke to me. So the person who was selling it had this big sign up, and it was all about how we take destruction and make it beautiful, how we take war and make it beautiful. So this ring is made out of aluminum bombs that the US dropped on the country of Laos, and to this day there's a ton of bombs that haven't gone off, and a lot of the country isn't actually safe to walk around because bombs are still being discovered and going off on people. It was really awesome that this country was able to take something like war and craft it into jewelry. It just really connected with me. I just find meaning behind it. I really like to collect souvenirs, especially more recently, that have a lot of meaning to me and send a positive message. Now, my next two souvenirs are purses that I had bought in Cartagena, Colombia. Cartagena has a very special place in my heart because it was the first solo trip I ever took, and it was highly spontaneous. I was Googling kayak or Google Flights or something, and I had found a very cheap flight to Cartagena. I decided to just book it and go. Everybody was telling me not to travel solo and it was dangerous, but I always knew that I wanted to be a solo traveler. I wanted to be a backpacker, and I just thought that I should try it. So I went on this trip all by myself for the very first time, and I fell in love with the backpacker culture. Of course, I wasn't backpacking, and I had never even met anybody before who had been backpacking, but of course I was staying in a hostel. It was my first time in a hostel surrounded by people who were backpacking. The environment at that hostel was just so upbeat. Everybody was so friendly. It really opened my eyes to a different style of travel, one that I had thought I wanted to try, but I wasn't sure because I had never been immersed in that environment before. I found a lot of confidence in myself to have traveled solo, and I decided that long-term travel was definitely something I wanted to try. In this hostel, I also made several really good friends. I knew that hostels would be social, but I didn't know how social they were until I met a really good friend. This purse reminds me of that friendship. It was my first ever hostel friendship, and to this day, probably the strongest friendship I made. And this just reminds me of her kindness and her generosity. She was actually the one who negotiated this purse for me. She had spoke Spanish, so she did a lot of the negotiations for us, and it just reminds me of that friendship. And I actually got to go visit her in Italy, which was her home country, on my most recent backpacking trip. Now this is my EDC bandana, and I happened to put it on my wall because I think it is so pretty and so colorful. So I put it on my wall, and now it's there to remind me of my first ever music festival I went to. So the last souvenir I want to show you on my wall is my hat from Vietnam. You probably recognize it. The day I got it, I was in Ninh Bình, and I was on an excursion, and they gave it to me. You probably remember I was very excited to get this hat. The tour gave us these hats, and I made my whole day. I'm very, very excited about it. I know it's very touristy, and I really don't know why I decided to carry it around with me. I guess I didn't want to throw it away. I was like, well, I already have it. It was free. I'm just gonna keep it. And now it's just a reminder of the fact that I carried it around through a few countries. Now, I have in this drawer some things from my very most recent trip, which was Mardi Gras in New Orleans. So I just got some of these. Yeah, so I kept some of my favorite beads. I kept way too many, but my plan is to put our masks that I also kept. They just aren't here, they're at Jan's house. And I plan to put those on the wall with some of the beads. So I kept a lot of extra to decide what beads looked best on the wall. But I also have a souvenir that I really care about in here from New Orleans. It is our voodoo doll. This is meaningful to me because within New Orleans, I got to learn about a new culture. I think voodoo has very negative connotations. In all the movies, the voodoo practitioners are always the bad guys, but I got to learn about it not as it being bad, as the religion. Voodoo is a religion, and it has cultural and historic context to it, and it is also a religion that is still practiced in New Orleans today. So when I was there, I actually got to speak to voodoo practitioners and ask them about it, and they told me about the history of voodoo and how New Orleans voodoo is different from other forms of voodoo like in Africa or the Caribbean. They told me kind of what voodoo means to them and how they practice it, which differs from each person. Religion and culture is my favorite part about travel. school, and I thought it was so interesting that I got to learn about a new religion, culture, history in America. Because when we were in New Orleans, I felt like I was in a completely different country. It was a really good experience to learn about the history of it and to have my mind expanded a bit right here in my home country. I wanted to show you my map. I almost forgot. So this is not technically a souvenir, but I wanted to show you anyway because it's really cool. It is my map of the Jungle Cruise. Fun fact, if you are at Disneyland, you could ask any employee of the Jungle Cruise for a map and they have to give you one. If you want a Disneyland like tips guide or anything, please let me know because I have lots. I actually plan to frame this pretty soon and put it on my wall because I just really like it. Now that is the end of my souvenir collection here in my room. However, I do have a few more that I want to show you at Jan's house because this is not complete unless I show you at least one thing that is Harry Potter related. So, see you at Jan's house. Here at Jan's house, I have my wand. This wand I got from Ollivanders at the Wizarding World of Harry Potter in LA. I didn't get it on my first trip, however it is one of my favorite memories ever because this is when the wand chose me. Just got back from Ollivanders and the most exciting thing just happened. They chose me! I got chosen to do the wand ceremony at Ollivanders. It was one of my favorite memories ever. And I love this wand. And it had to be in this video. And at Jan's house we also have this Stein. This is probably my other favorite souvenir because we got it when we were at Oktoberfest. And it's just, it's amazing. It is one of the most expensive souvenirs I've ever bought, for sure. But I love it. It's a great decoration and it's a great memory. I just love it. Then last but not least, I have my Mardi Gras mask. This isn't the mask that I was wearing in the video if you've seen the vlogs. You may have noticed that I also picked up a mask. This is a mask that we bought that's a little bit nicer because we just really wanted to be able to hang it up. I really enjoy getting souvenirs that I could put around the house and hang up. For example, this one or the Stein, because every time you walk by it, you're just reminded of those amazing memories from those places. And that wraps up my souvenir collection from around the world. I hope you enjoyed this video and I will see you on the next adventure. Bye.